Alright, so before I start this tier list, I did want to mention a couple of things um, regarding the previous one. So there was surprisingly not that much disagreement with the placements of cards, less than I was expecting anyway. I think the biggest disagreement that was had was over Festival, um, and for the record, I mean I could totally see Festival being rated higher um, than I put it. But, you know, again, I want to stress these are kind of just my opinion, the way I see things. Um, and you're welcome to think of Festival as highly as you want to think of it. I certainly think it's a strong card. I just think it's a card you go for less often than something that draws, just because the not drawing really is pretty significant. Of course, it's very good in the presence of terminal draw, but that's a given. Anyway, I don't want to waste too much time on that. Oh, another thing I have to mention here, because it's something asked about in the previous video, and it confused a lot of people, is I'm talking about these cards in the context of all of Dominion currently released. I'm not talking about Intrigue alone, or base set alone last time. I don't play single set games. I'm not saying that it's invalid if you like to play those kinds of games, or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, this is the meta that I know, and that's the one I'm knowledgeable about. So, there you go. Well, at any rate, let's get right into this with Intrigue. Hopefully some people will join me on the stream tonight. If they don't, that's cool too. I have to close the program here. Okay. Well, let's get things started right off the gate with Harem. Oh, and if you need an explanation of these tiers, please go watch the base set video. I explain it kind of at the beginning. So Harem, I'm perhaps controversially going to place it in the bottom tier. Explain yourself, please. I think Harem is a pretty weak card most of the time. It's not like a bad kind of mid to in game purchase sometimes, but you have to have a good reason for getting it over A, gold, and B, duchy. And often you're better off going with one or the other depending on the state of the game. Of course, it has combos, strong combos even, but that's still a situation where you'd have to explain why you were buying Harem. And I think most of the time you're better off just going with gold or duchy, again, depending on the situation. Yeah, it's not a terrible card, but one you really should be avoiding except under specific circumstances. Let's move on here. Good old Steward. Yeah, so Steward, on the flip side, is definitely in the centralizing tier. It's a trasher that's so good, you pretty much can't ignore it when it's on the board. And the reason for that is not actually that it's like a great trasher, because I mean it's still a pretty good one, although it has its weaknesses. Like being forced to trash 2 kind of sucks, but yeah, it's still pretty good. But the nice thing about Steward, of course, is that it's flexible mid to late game. Particularly at mid game, it's a nice +2 cards. And since it thins, it leads you toward a deck where a +2 card draw card actually helps your engine out. If you didn't have that trashing, Steward wouldn't be nearly as good of a drawer as it is. And the coin option, also useful. Usually the least useful of the 3, but it's kind of in the middle as far as all effects in Dominion go, I guess. Now that statement didn't make any sense, but what I'm saying is Steward is really good, and you should probably buy it if it's on the board. Odds are you open with it, sometimes with 2, although I think statistics show that's usually not that smart of an idea. Yeah, and I think it's pretty self-evident. Steward's powerful. Courtyard. This one's a little hard for me to place. I do get it a lot, but at the same time, I kind of understand why you wouldn't want to get it. But I think it's good enough to put in usually tier, although it's kind of a light usually. Of course, Courtyard Big Money was kind of all the rage back in the day, but I don't think it's not actually that good. I mean, it's probably better than Smithy Big Money on average, since you can tuck a card away, which is usually nice. Kind of the big problem with Courtyard is it's not all that great in engines. Like, it's pretty good at the start of the game when you can top deck a terminal that you opened with or something like that. Um, and of course, it combos well with certain cards like Mystic, something like that, you know. But the thing is, the net draw of it, I mean, it's still just +2 cards. And yeah, that's really just not that hot. Of course, for a 2-coin cost card, what do you expect, right? Yeah, it's pretty decent for the cost. And again, I want to stress, like, in non-engine games, Courtyard is pretty nice. Like, in what Wandering Winder would call a good stuff deck, or even if you're just playing a big money deck, Courtyard is pretty nice because those kinds of decks often will hit weird price points. Like, they'll hit 7 or 9, and you'll want to put a copper back, or you'll overdraw your money and you'll want to save one, or you'll hit your other terminal and you'll want to save it. You know, all these kind of situations happen, and yeah. So I think they happen often enough that I'm comfortable putting Courtyard here, but I could see an argument for putting it lower. I don't think it's quite a card you always buy. Yeah, but it's pretty good, and often in the opening. Duke. So Duke, I think, is one of these cards that's fallen a bit behind in the meta. So far, I'd almost call it a niche card, but I think the types of games where you can pull off a Duke's Log are common enough that it's in the sometimes tier. You do have to, you got to think about it, especially if there's a very fast engine that can score a lot of points. Duke doesn't look so rosy a lot of the time, these days at least. And there's just very powerful engines going on. But if you're playing these kinds of money games where someone can't empty the province pile very quickly, you'd often be surprised how much better Duke can perform versus those kinds of decks. And of course, if you could buy tons of duchies in one turn and start threatening Dukes, often that's really powerful. Just depends on the situation, and it's so board dependent. It's kind of hard for me to kind of nail for sure where to put Duke, but I'm comfortable enough saying it's just a sometimes card. But you know, the argument for niche is definitely there, and I will acknowledge that right here. Let's skip the cut cards again in case I don't have time for them. Nobles. I think Nobles is a pretty strong staple. You know, so the effects on it, you've got obviously the +3 cards and the +2 actions. Generally, if Nobles is your village, you've got a problem because it's slow to get and it's basically an necropolis, so it's not that great of a village. But hey, you'll take it sometimes if you have to. Still, $6 for a necropolis is pretty bad, but +3 cards is a nice effect. And of course, the flexibility, you know, that's something that matters. Of course, the other nice thing about it is 2 victory points. So it allows you to delay greening while making a more consistent deck by adding nobles. Often I find myself just contesting nobles before even bothering with province, and it's often the right call. Yeah, so it's just kind of remained solid throughout the years. It's still a pretty good card that you'll buy almost every time it's on the board. I think that's good enough to call it a staple. Like, you know, a lot of times with these victory cards, you write off the points because they don't matter that much. But I feel like with nobles, it matters more for some reason. I guess because, again, like I was saying, you're still making your deck good while adding the point card, which is not always the case. Yeah, kind of a little bit hard to evaluate, but yeah, I'd say it's a staple, plainly enough. I'll clean up a little bit of this. Swindler, oh boy. So I guess full disclosure, I really don't like Swindler. and that's probably coloring my opinion of it a little bit, but I put Swindler here in centralizing. Even if it's not like one of the best cards in Dominion, it pretty much dictates the pace of the game all on its own. Like, you're afraid to open with certain cards because of Swindler, or you open with Swindler because you're worried about what happens if you don't, or it just completely shuts down a strategy someone starts going for. Like, it hits their chapel. I mean, that's the end of the game right there. 9 times out of 10, you know, um, at least early enough in the game. It's just so high variance, but in a way that's very game warping at times. And of course, sometimes it does nothing. Like, sometimes it's just not great. But I think even in those cases, like, even in the cases where Swindler is bad, you gotta remember you're like analyzing the board to evaluate whether you should skip Swindler because it's that big of a threat. That's kind of why I put it up here. It's so nasty, man. It's so nasty. Now, it's really fun, like, if you're just playing casual Dominion with, like, 6 people or something, then Swindler is great, and I love it. But, yeah, I feel like it kind of imbalances the game in a way I personally don't like, but I understand why some people like it. Anyway, I'm not talking about what I like. I'm talking about how important it is to the game, and I think Swindler is very important when it's in the kingdom. You can't ignore it. Thus, it is centralizing. Okay. Speaking of which, we have Lurker. Now, I am not an expert on Lurker. It's still a fairly new card and still pretty complicated, but there's really nowhere else you can put it. Fact is, Lurker is just, if someone starts getting the Lurkers, you gotta go in, because, I mean, you can't let them get away with it, pretty much. Especially if there's a key Lurker combo in the kingdom, like Hunting Grounds or Possession or Grand Market or something like that. You just cannot ignore this thing. I mean, it turns the game completely sideways. Now, not just like you see it in, the cute thing, of course, is that you can gain cards from the trash and you can put them in the trash to gain, right? But the real key there is that it can burn piles. Like, you can just trash anything. Um, so yeah, like a deck that plays lots of lurkers every turn has a ton of pile control. Like, it's so powerful in the in game that I'm not convinced it should have been printed the way it is. But I don't know. Of course, there are boards where it does nothing, but there are boards where Chapel does nothing. So uh, it's still pretty centralizing. Like, if lurkers there, you got to think, can I skip the whole buying treasure to buy things entirely part of Dominion? Yeah. Lurker does that. So, yes, it's centralizing. Completely warps the game when it's at its best, and even kind of at its average case. So, Ironworks, I'm going to say it's not quite centralizing, but it is strong enough that it definitely should be a staple. It's um, it's just an incredible card with lots of self-synergy. Remember, like, you can use Ironworks to gain Ironworks, and if you have enough draw, even just cantrips, that means you can pile out the game with this thing. Of course, that's an extreme case. Just game to game, like on an average basis, Ironworks is really good. Gaining 4 cost actions, like I was saying with Workshop last time, it's very, very good. And Ironworks is an even better way to do it than Workshop, because you gain them and get an action pack. But it's also nice for gaining silvers early in the game to hit price points. Yeah, sometimes you'll take a silver if it helps you hit 5. And there are even cases for gaining estates to draw. And with any alternate victory like Silk Road or Gardens, yeah, you got to think about an Ironworks Rush. The fact that it makes those rushes possible means it's definitely a really strong card. Um, yeah, and not too much else to say about it. It's just a very strong gainer. Probably still one of the best in the game. And I'd be remiss if not to mention it combos well with these dual type cards. Like Mill is a nice one, but also Island, yeah, other cards like that. Yeah, really solid. Okay, Minion. So I think if you're like new to moderately good at the game, you just automatically would think centralizing. I'm going to argue it's more of a staple card myself. It is very powerful at times. Minion decks can be pretty good. They're sort of like draw to X decks. It's like you empty out your hand, and then you draw a new hand, and then you play more stuff, and you play another minion. And of course, the really nice thing that's happening in addition to that is you get this attack. And Minion actually has a very brutal attack. Like with most hand size attacks, like for instance Militia. Militia might make you discard more cards, but you get the choice of what to discard. Minion doesn't give your opponent a choice at all. Like it just says bye bye hand, and here's 4 different cards. Yeah, so in many ways, it's more powerful than an attack that reduces hand size down to 3, or even 2, like Legionary. So yeah, it's a pretty sick attack, and it's non-terminal, of course. And you know, the minion is a 1-card combo, but it's a very limited 1-card combo. It really only gets treasure, and I mean that's great if all you're doing is buying a single province. But you often find that that stalls in the end game. Yeah, minion does need like other cards in the kingdom for it to be really good. Yeah, so I want to be clear. Like I think minion deck's very powerful, and usually you're going to get minion when it's in the board, but it can also be countered. And sometimes the environment's not good for it. Like a good minion deck really needs trashing to be like perfect. So if you don't have that, like you probably shouldn't be over relying on minion. I think. Of course, some people will disagree with me, I'm sure. And you know, if you feel like minion belongs up here, well, have at it. You know, you can have that. But I think it fits solidly in here at least. And to me, that's about it. All right, wishing well. So wishing well, I don't quite have it here. All right. So it's actually a pretty good draw card. I will usually pick up at least 1 or 2 of them, but I can see an argument for sometimes as well. Also an argument for staple, but I don't think it's quite good enough. Like the fact is, in a lot of kingdoms, there is an element of unreliability to wishing well. Now, if you're very good at tracking your deck, you can guess with pretty high accuracy what's coming up a couple cards ahead. You know, and you can build your deck toward it being very easy to guess. And you can also combo with stuff like Cartographer to make it extremely easy to guess. But really, just in an average case, like if you have a pretty good idea, wishing well is often better than silver. Like if you do draw that card, remember like it's effectively a lab at that point, and labs are really nice. They're like a staple card, and wishing wells are also very cheap, which is nice. Of course, if you get too many of them, then you have to start wishing for wishing wells, which is always awkward. Um, yeah, I think it's good enough. You usually pick up 1 or 2 and leave it at that. At least that's kind of how I play the game. But you know, like it never hurts to have more of them. Well, I guess it could. Yeah, I'm like you know I was saying sometimes it's a staple, and I think putting it in the middle is a nice compromise. You usually get some, and usually they're pretty good. That's about how I feel about it. You know, it's interesting with the few people I've played this game in real life with. A lot of the newer players who aren't quite as good, um, yeah, they really hate wishing well. I've noticed just because they can't quite figure it out. But my mother-in-law, when I played Dominion with her, really loved this card because she guessed mathematically, of course, that copper was the most likely thing to hit with wishing well, and thus named copper every time. And she hit every time in the game we played. Yeah. So yeah, there you go, a complete noob at the game who speaks English as a second language and didn't really understand all the rules of the game. Thought wishing well was like a top tier card. There you go. Nah, it's fun. I like wishing well. Okay, pawn. You know what? While I'm here, I just noticed pawn is carrying a torch. I've been looking at this art for years and never noticed that. Wow, that's pretty lit, as the kids would say. Okay, So Pawn, I'm also going to stick it in usually. It's not a very good card, I think. Often you're just playing it for plus card, plus action, and using it like as filler. But the strongest thing Pawn does is it gives you a plus buy, honestly. Like, that's usually the niche it's filling on the board, the thing that's missing. Yeah, and Pawn does that well enough. It fits it great with draw to X decks. Like Minion, good example there. And it's one of those cards where it's like, yeah, nice to have, and maybe you just get it when you have some spare extra buys. Um, and it's low enough risk that you usually buy it just because you do. Like, again, like if you're just playing it as card action, yeah, it's not bad. Also works really well with stuff like King's Court, Pathfinding, etc. Because it's a cheap $2 pile. You can get a lot of them. And it can be pretty flexible at times. But it's not powerful enough to say it's a staple, certainly. Yeah, it's just something you usually get because it's easy. Yeah. There you go. Okay, mill. So I was thinking about this before I started this stream, where I'd put mill, and I'm still not 100% sure. It's kind of definitely between staple and usually, and so I'm just going to leave it in the middle because I could be swayed either way. Mill's a card I open with very frequently, maybe like 75% of the time, often because I'm in the absence of a better option. So the nice thing about Mill is it gives you an extremely high chance of hitting 5 in the first shuffle. Um, like, silver opening, sometimes you go with them to bank on hitting 5, but Mill gives you a pretty nice guarantee. It's like one of the few cards that actually almost guarantees it. And it's very, very good for that. Good enough that like you'll very frequently open it, especially if you happen to have Hovel in your hand. Um, but I, but then I see people just hammer this pile and get a ton of them, and then never use the mills effectively in games. So I think it's also kind of a trap card now. But it's good enough in that opening, and the 1 point and the 2 coins nice enough that it is usually bought. But I think you got to be careful. You only want to use it in mass in certain kinds of decks, like a minion deck, great example, because yeah, you're okay discarding stuff, right? But if you're just playing a normal like engine, often the mill is a bit counterproductive, or it's just like not going to come to fruition. Like I wouldn't overinvest in it. If there's something more important at 4, you should probably be going for it. But yeah, mill's pretty cool. Yeah, you should probably get 1 or 2 of them in a game. And I'd leave it at that unless there's a compelling reason to do more. So yeah, for me, usually, but I can see argument for staple, so I'm leaving it here. Pretty strong argument. Like even though like I'd only recommend opening with 1 most of the time, still kind of staple-ish. Yep. Now patrol. So here's another one. I often feel like this card is underrated in these lists. So it's like Smithy, and it also has this nice bonus effect, putting the victory cards and curses in your hand. Pretty cool. And I believe I put Smithy here and usually, and I kind of feel like Patrol's pretty much the same. Like, yeah, it's a card you usually get. It's nice terminal draw, has that filtering effect, or like if you just need cards in your hand and don't care what they are, like, yeah, Patrol's pretty great there. Kind of like Advisor. Of course, being terminal does it no favors, but yeah, it would be really overpowered if it wasn't terminal. Like Scout. Yeah, we'll get to him. So this can be like a dynamite draw card, and it can be just okay. The reordering is really nice. Unfortunately, it has this effect where because it's showing you the next 7 cards in your deck, what I mean is it's drawing 3 and then it's showing 4, so it cycles 7 and or like it doesn't cycle, but it looks at 7 cards ahead. it means you're going to be triggering reshuffles more often than you would with other terminal draw. You have to be careful about that, especially if important cards were played before the patrol. And I think that does limit its effectiveness in some kingdoms, but it's also like strong enough that it compensates for that. Um, I don't know. I feel like there's a balancing act there. Like it's not so good that you like will just always get it, like a staple. You kind of have to weigh the consequences of getting it. And so I'm more comfortable putting it here with Smithy in this tier. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. I do think it's really good card. Probably better than it looks on one of these lists. Because again, I have to reiterate, this order doesn't mean this card's better than this one. No, it just means you get it more often, pretty much. Okay, not much else to say about that. Good draw card. Baron. So, Baron's pretty nice, but has its disadvantages, and I think that makes it a sometimes card. Of course, it can be very nice for spiking, which is a concept I want to write an article about, and I've been thinking about. But yeah, basically, when you have cards in the kingdom that cost a lot, like 6 to 8 coin, and it's really important that you get them, cards like Baron are very nice. You get this 4 coin spike early in the game that gives you a high chance of buying that card. Yeah, Baron's great for the situations. And it's also a plus buy. If it's the only one in the kingdom, you probably have to go for it. Unfortunately, like this whole meeting the estate in hand, it can be pretty awkward sometimes. Like usually you can make it so there's a pretty high chance that you have one, but estates are pretty bad to have in your deck otherwise, unless there's a combo. So Baron always has to deal with that issue. And so often you'll take another plus buy instead of a Baron. And honestly, plus 4 coin, while it's nice, it does kind of taper off in usefulness as the game goes on. Like, it's kind of funny when you're building a big engine and you've got Baron as part of your payload, the hoops you go through sometimes, like to play multiple Barons and then draw the estates back up. I feel like it's just not worth it for only 4 coins, personally. Yeah, like, it's an okay card, but it's not it's very rarely does the game revolve around it. Now that said, I do want to just reminisce a little bit about the Dominion Online Championships last year, where I was up against Dan Brooks, the current top player. And of course, it was a 7-game set, and we had to win 4 games. And I was up 3-0 on him. And one of and then he came back and he won 3 games against me. So the final game we played was a donate game, and Baron was in the kingdom. I did not see the devilish combo that is Baron donate because I wasn't that experienced with donate at the time. Yeah, I just want to throw that out there. Baron is pretty dang good on donate boards. Yeah, that early 4 coin that's easy to set up via donate. Yeah, you cannot underestimate that. So yeah, certainly it's a good card, but it's one you don't always get. You got to evaluate if it's worth the estate hoops. And don't forget, it can pile out estates toward the end of the game. Like, sometimes that's pretty useful. Anyway, let's move on from Baron. So next is Masquerade. Now, if you're knowledgeable about Dominion, you probably, this is no surprise to you. It's definitely very top tier card. If you don't get it, the simplest way I can explain it is that it both draws and trashes. Like the passing part of Masquerade, yeah, that can be annoying, it can be useful, and all that jazz, but it's got nothing on the fact that it's draws and trashes, which is just a sick combo. Okay, think about it this way, right? Like, you're moving the game along by drawing 2 cards, like you're pushing forward in your deck, and also trashing a card, which is making your deck more fluid, right? So those 2 things together lead to your deck like being on super fuel, pretty much. You just got to play a lot of games with it and see it in action to get what I'm talking about. Yeah, it reduces your deck size while also moving through the deck. It's not like cards like Steward, where you got to pick one or the other, or Chapel, where it doesn't draw. Like, you're hoping you draw the chapel again. Masquerade, you have a very high chance of getting back to quickly. And of course, it does have combos too. Hand size attack plus militia, sick. There used to be a pin, or several pins with Masquerade, and now there's only like one left you can do, I think, with Cut Purse. And yeah, there might be more I'm not aware of, but Masquerade does open up those things. It kind of breaks the rules of the game with Dominion a little bit with its passing mechanic. So yeah, you can't ignore that stuff if there's a combo. Like with Possession, you cannot ignore Masquerade. And because you can't ignore it, and because you usually open with it when it's in the board, I'm saying it's centralizing. Very powerful card. Probably top 5 in the game, something like that. Yeah, maybe top 10. I don't know. I'm not gonna make that list. Let's move on to Diplomat. Diplomat, one of my favorite cards in Intrigue. So it's not quite a staple because like sometimes you just can't make it work. It's sort of between usually and sometimes. I'm gonna say sometimes, even though I like it a lot. I think you do have to evaluate whether it's worth activating Diplomat. Let me put it this way: if you're not activating Diplomat's effect and getting the +2 actions from it, it's not worth it. And you should find some other way to play the game, probably. But if you are, then it's a really awesome draw card. And Village. And there are lots of ways to make it happen. There are like tons of ways, like for instance, play Upgrade, trash a card from your hand. Now you have fewer cards in your hand. Play Diplomat, bada bing, bada boom. Okay. It also responds to attacks and sets itself up. So there's lots of ways to do it, but those ways have to be in place for Diplomat to be good. Simple as that. And it is quite good, but you probably don't want to get too many of them. You need a good ratio of Diplomats to other cards in order for it to be good. Yeah, not much else to say. Sweet card. If you're not good with it, get good with it. It's fun. Alright. Replace. So Replace definitely is a staple, along with Remodel. It's a little bit better than Remodel. So it's funny, it's actually just Remodel, right? Except if you get a victory card, it curses them, and if you get an action or treasure, it top decks it. So you usually don't want to top deck treasure, but top decking actions is really sweet, especially mid game kind of, and for setting up mid turn combos. And of course, giving a curse while you gain victory cards is really cool. It gives you an extra point swing on your opponent, and junks them. Although I find that the point swing is often more relevant than the junking because you're kind of I don't know how to describe this. It just feels that way to me. It's probably bogus, just a non-thing that's happening. But regardless, Replace is really good. You can use it for all the same things you use for other remodelers, like ending the game early, or turning estates into something nice, turning silvers into something nice. All that jazz does all that, but with some really nice extra effects added in. Yeah, it's solid. Okay, Mining Village. Mining Village is definitely a staple. It's a card you pretty much always buy when it's in the kingdom. It's a village, of course. Not much else to say there. And it's got this nice in-game trashing effect, although you can also use it early and mid-game to spike certain values. Now, you want to avoid doing that during the duration of time where you need villages, but, go nuts at the end of the game. Like, it's actually very easy to forget that you can trash your mining villages for money. Like, I forget it myself a lot, but you can set up some pretty explosive turns with that extra cash. So don't be too afraid of trashing it when necessary. But even without that, it's a village, so it's here. Yeah, not much else to say about it. Oh, and of course, combo it with Lurker, Rogue, anything like that. Yeah, and it's very, very sick. Okay, Bridge. Bridge is a centralizing card. I could see an argument for staple, sure, but I think it's one of the best cost reducers still. You might think, well, Highway is better because it's non-terminal and it's easy to load up on them, but the important thing about Bridge is it doesn't just reduce costs, it also gives you tools that help you use that effect like very effectively. The plus buy being the most important of them, but the plus coin also being more significant than you would think. If you look at Bridge Troll and like the difference between Bridge Troll and Bridge, Bridge pulls off mega turns like a little bit easier in my experience. And part of that is just the coin. It lets you load up on stuff mid-game that Bridge Troll has a little bit more trouble getting. And like with Bridge Troll, you have to buy treasures sometimes, like to complement it. Bridge gets away with that without having them. Yeah, it's kind of almost an all-in-one package as long as you've got villages in the kingdom. Yeah, if there's any non-terminal draw and villages in the kingdom with Bridge, you're probably going for Bridge. And even if not, like it's usually a pretty good pickup regardless. Like you're probably doing something with a Bridge payload. Like, I mean, payload's kind of the key word there. It's like one of the best payload cards in the game. So yeah, Bridge rules. And I could talk more at length about it, I guess, but yeah, it's just really good. Yeah. Okay, let's do Secret Passage. And just to be honest, I really don't know where to put it. I'm gonna say usually. Because the thing is, it's pretty much a cantrip a lot of the time, or it's like one. Like you draw the 2 cards, but then you got to put something back in your deck. And if you can combo that with something, or if you can put a card somewhere where it's going to be nice to have it, like next turn or down the line, that's great. Those combos aren't always there, but even if they aren't, I mean, I find more often than not you'd rather have secret chamber or secret passages than not have them. Yeah, like I don't have a great handle on the card, to be honest, but you know, like the obvious synergies are there. Wishing Well, of course, is one of them. But it also can work a lot like Courtyard, where you just put something up for next turn. You know, just be creative with it, and you'll find a use. And there's usually at least some way you can make use of the thing. Yeah, like it's not a card you avoid by any means. It's a card like you'll usually happily get. Although you should probably prioritize more important cards. Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good overall. So Shantytown. Shantytown, my perhaps controversial opinion is that this is a sometimes card. Like, of course, it's a village, and that's nice, but you know, I'm sitting here thinking about it. I'm thinking like I'm being too harsh. I'm being too harsh. Yeah, it's more like let's stick it in the middle here because it's one of those cards you take because you have to, right? It's a village and not a great one, but it can be pretty good early in the game. If you open it with a cantrip or another non-terminal card, it's basically a lab, right? And if you only have cantrips or non-terminals, it's always a lab, basically, unless it collides with another Shantytown. So usually you want to not go too crazy with the Shantytowns and just have a few of them to complement your actions. Although sometimes you got to get a bunch of them. But there's nothing sadder than like a hand where you draw Shantytown with another action and you can't activate the Shantytown. It just happens so much. It makes me so sad that I can't say, like, I can't put it in here and feel good about it. Like, I feel like you have to evaluate whether that's likely to happen or not. Because the fact is, an unactivated Shantytown is a necropolis, and that's probably not what you were going for with this thing. So, yeah, I think you have to think hard enough about it that you don't just auto buy it. Yeah, it's just kind of in the middle here. You get it when it's appropriate. Yeah, which is decently often. Okay, let's move some of these poor emo cards down here. Conspirator. Yeah, Conspirator is a very nice card. you're usually playing an Ancient and Dominion, so you're usually buying Conspirators. They're very good payload, as long as you're activating them. That's the thing. If you can't activate them, then you don't get them, and that's that. Like, but it's nice. Like, you get 2 coins and you keep going through your deck. Like, it's definitely a very, very good effect as long as you get them going. It's possible to overinvest in them, and you do have to have enough other actions to actually kick off the chain. But yeah, as long as you get it going, like, it's hard to argue with it. I mean, it's a good card. So you're usually going to want to get them, just not in money games. Yeah, I think it's a deceptively simple card, honestly. Like, it's like you get it or you don't. There's not really much nuance to it, I don't think. Yeah, there you go, Conspirator. It's good. All right, Torturer. So this one kind of fits with Swindler in some ways. It's a centralizing card. Now, of course, it has its disadvantages compared to other cursors. Like Witch always gives out the curse, which is really good. Torturer gives them the choice, and so they can avoid the curses, and it's possible for them to play around that. But let's be real, if you've played enough Dominion, you have been on the receiving end of a Torturer chain, and you know that, yeah, Torturer is really brutal, and it's very often brutal. Like, there are games that just come down to who gets that Torturer chain going. And a big part of that is just that it gives +3 cards, and +3 cards is such a good effect. Yeah, I mean, it's like deceptively the best part of the card. Of course, the attack, very nice too. Like, it wouldn't be this good without that attack. And just the fact that it can make them discard below 3 cards before their turn even starts. Oh man, it's so annoying and it's so good. But yeah, it's kind of like they can't take the curses because it makes it harder for them to set up their own chain, Like, everything revolves around getting that thing working. That's why it's centralizing. It completely changes the focus of the game. Unless there's a counter. And if there's a counter, that's great. I'm looking at you. But sometimes there's no counter. And then you just have to deal with it. You gotta play this Torturer game. Okay, pretty simple, I think. Yeah. Next is Upgrade. So this, I'm a little divided on it. Because I think it's definitely like a really powerful card. But I think there are a lot of times when it's limited. Nonetheless, I think you usually get at least one upgrade. I'm putting it in staple, and there's definitely an argument that it's centralizing. So one thing to keep in mind with upgrade is that, like Ironworks, it can be used for pileouts at the end of the game and other forms of mid-turn gaining, and that's one of its best effects that you have to keep in mind, especially at high-level play, where you will see top players doing things you didn't think possible with this card. But they are very possible. Turning 4 costs into 5 costs is a very nice effect, for instance. And of course, it can be used for general trashing. Turning 0 costs into nothing, always good. Turning estates into silvers, not bad. But, the better the thing you trash, the better the thing you get. It's that kind of deal. Usually I get 2 or 3 of them in a game myself. And that's why I'm seeing it as a staple. Yeah, if you can open with it, all the better. Has its weaknesses, like a lot of cards, but I think it's good enough that you've got to at least give it this much credit. Yeah, a non-terminal trash for benefit is really good. Okay. Now, Trading Post. So, Trading Post, I think, is a great example of the reason that this tier list is not like these cards are better than these cards. These cards are better than these cards. It's not linear, all right? So Trading Post has a very nice effect. It's very powerful, but it's an effect that you only get sometimes, okay? So it lets you trash 2 cards and turn them into a silver. If you can open with Trading Post, like you open 5-2, often Trading Post is just the best opening. There's no getting around it. You know, if you're under torture or attack, all of a sudden Trading Post is amazing, right? But the fact is, like, there are a lot of kingdoms where this is not that good of an effect, or it's not worth going out of your way for, or you don't want the silver, or it just doesn't thin enough. Um, yeah, and there's just so many situations where you want to duck Trading Post that I mean, it's almost like a niche card, but it's not quite that niche, right? Um, yeah, it's got a good enough effect that you have to consider it when it's on the board. Um, but it's a pretty strong consideration, I would say. Yeah, like it's yeah, it's interesting because it's like I was saying, it's one of those cards where if you get it at the start, it's amazing, and then every turn after that, it steadily gets worse and worse as an option. Um, okay, so hopefully that's semi-convincing. Yeah, I don't know. You just have to play with it. You'll see over time. Although I do like this card a lot. I try to get it when I can. So Courtier, Courtier, Courtier. You know, despite having like a master's degree in English, I can't pronounce this. um, so this is a really fun card um, that I usually get, but uh, I think I think it's not quite a staple. I think it's not quite this good. Um, you're usually going to get one, and the reason is that it's got the plus buy, honestly. And there's almost always at least one card in the kingdom that you can combo with Courtier to get extra effects from, right? But something you have to keep in mind here is that it's not always good to get all those effects, right? Like gaining gold is not necessarily congruent with a card that gives plus buy and terminal coin. That's the kind of card you want in an engine that doesn't have a lot of gold, right? So yeah, I think sometimes people make the wrong calls when they play this card. But with that said, like the effects are very nice, and it's pretty easy to get things going with it, especially if you're using the later expansions that have cards that have like 3 or 4 types. You know, like knights. Geez, it's pretty effective with this. Um, but yeah, you know, you got to pick your spots here. And like if there's a more consistent option in the kingdom, for instance, like if Market Square is there, that's really a better source of plus buy than Courtier because it's just so easy to get them, right? Like you might get Courtier for the payload with the coin or something, and I mean it combos with Market Square, so that's cool. But yeah, you got to think about it a little. Like you're usually gonna get one, but maybe think about it. Like don't just auto buy it. Okay, that's kind of how I feel. With that said, it's very fun. I like the card a lot. And that guy's hat is baller. He's got a baller hat. Okay. All right. So real quick, let's go through the cut cards. I don't want to linger on them too much. So Saboteur is a definite explain yourself card. It was also cut for being a card everyone hated. Um, and fact of the matter is, like, often it helps your opponent toward the end of the game. Often it does nothing, or it's just like not worth playing, and it's just bad feelings all around. Like it's nice with King's Court, but so is everything, right? I mean, is that really worth saying it's a good card? Like that it's like okay with one card? I don't know. Like I think there are better trashing attacks, and yeah, I'm not sad about Saboteur leaving. Hopefully no one else is. Great Hall. Um, so you know how I was saying Trading Post was a good example of like why these tiers don't mean these cards are strictly better. Yeah, Great Hall is kind of the opposite case where I'm going to put it as a usually. Here, let's get Scout out of the way. Um, I don't even mind that Scout got cut up there. Yeah, you're usually going to get Great Hall when it's there just because it's free. Like it doesn't really take up space in your deck, but it's not good. I mean, it's just a point, pretty much. Yeah, so it's kind of a do nothing, but it doesn't hurt you to get it, so you usually get it. Yeah. Whoop-de-doo, right? Yeah. So that's about the most generosity I will give Great Hall. Secret Chamber, which is good since I'm here looking at it. Secret Chamber doesn't explain yourself. Yeah, it's the weakest discard for coin effect in the game by far, and the reaction effect is actually okay, but usually not worth having this really crappy terminal card in your deck. Like often, like it sits in your hand and takes up space. Just like you would have been better off buying nothing. Like most of the time you got this thing. Like it had a few compelling cases for it, but yeah, just overall it was a waste most of the time that you got it. You had to have a really good reason, and I can't think of any off the top of my head. So yes, I'm very comfortable sticking it here. Coppersmith. So we finally get a niche card in Intrigue. Yeah, Coppersmith. It could have a decent payload in the right kind of deck, where you would stay copper heavy. Although, really, even in those days, you didn't want too many coppers with Coppersmith. Like probably 4 or 5 would have been plenty most of the time, just to make sure you could actually draw Coppersmith with a plus buy card. Yeah, and that's kind of the reason it's niche. Is just like it was so hard to set up. You had to have so many things in the kingdom to make it work. And sure, it was satisfying when it did work, but yeah, like you had to work so hard that like with these cards, you don't have to work hard to make them good. Like Coppersmith, you do, and that's fun and all, but it doesn't make it like a card you should always go for. So yeah, it's a niche card. It was fun, I guess. Some people are really attached to it and they want it back, and yeah, I never felt quite that way myself. Tribute. Yeah, Tribute was also pretty much a niche card. It could be really powerful, like if you revealed just the right cards to get a good effect, or if you could guarantee it somehow. And in those cases, like it was really solid, but the average case was just okay at best. Even like +4 actions, like sometimes that could be okay, but a lot of times you just wouldn't get the effect you wanted out of it. It wouldn't serve you well at the time. That's why, yeah, I can't really be more generous toward it. And the sad fact is, now that more sets have come out, we have things like night cards, right? And Tribute wouldn't even interact with them, right? They would basically counter Tribute and make it worse. So it would be even more niche than it already was. That's sad. Yeah, so it's a good thing we got this or this card in replacement Tribute. Okay, and that brings us to our last card. Our last card, Scout. Where should we put it? Where does the mighty Scout go? Where am I gonna troll you? Am I gonna put it in its proper place? Or am I just gonna end the video here? Because yeah, I don't care where Scout goes. Yeah, that's all I have to say about Intrigue. So again, I'll state, like, if you're playing Dominion, and you see these cards in these tiers, you should definitely be thinking pretty hard about putting them in your deck because they're really good. These cards, they're good options, and you gotta think about the cases where you're gonna get them, but they're not must buys. These cards, you should probably be avoiding them unless you got a good reason. Anyway, that's the second video of Steerless. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time with Seaside, if I ever get to it.